Right, guys, welcome to the first one on citizenship. Now, there are a lot of slides in here. I've kind of put this together from the lessons quite quickly, so do bear with us. Again, as with the history ones, you need to be using this alongside the revision guides that you should have. Okay. I'll try and link them as much as I can to the questions, but you know. Again, you need to be having a look at AQA Citizenship Online and practicing the questions yourselves. Remember, all the questions on this paper are so open, they cover a huge amount of political content, so just, again, try and combine your revision to different factors, and I'll try and help you do this as we go through, okay? Right, so today, this first video is going to be on like democracy and the initial setting up of government. Right, so what is democracy? Basically a type of government based on the principle all people are equal, collectively hold power. Basically, it gives people a say, right? So where people get a say in the ruling of the government. Comes from the Greek demokratia. Again, you might hear democracy come from the original Greek city-state of Athens. Not the same democracy we have today, but we'll talk about that as we go forward. But just be aware of that general definition. If you ever get a question on what is democratic, what is not democratic, you should know the basis of democracy being everyone's got a voice. Something that's non-democratic normally shuts down those voices. Right, a few examples of countries that call themselves democracies and those who maybe aren't. Have a little think in your head which one you believe are democracies as opposed to those who aren't. So you have a dictatorship, normally one person or small group has absolute power. You have anarchy, no government, but don't get too hung up on anarchy. It's a confusing concept. In my opinion, it's only ever really happened, from my knowledge, once in the Spanish Civil War, where there was no real governing body at the time because they're all fighting each other. Anarchy is normally like a period between the fall of one government and the rise of another. So don't spend too much time on that. You've got one-party systems, you've got things like China, for instance, and monarchies. There's different types of monarchies. So you've got absolute monarchies, where your king or queen has all the power. The absolute monarchy concept comes from Louis XIV, the Sun King, who ruled with an iron fist. Don't get it confused with our monarchy. Our monarchy is a constitutional monarchy. This is where it works alongside our parliament. And a constitutional monarchy, their power is very much withdrawn. But we'll talk about that as we go through. Okay. And theocracy. Theocracy ruled by religious authority. An example of that is Iran. Right. Again, just to highlight those different parties. China, yes, they do call themselves a democracy, but they basically are a one-party state. A good example of, if you're ever using this in the question, democracy versus non-democratic principles. China's a good example because they claim democracy, but if you have a one-party state, then you don't have an option. So you don't really have a choice, do you? You can only vote for one party. Yet, countries like China and Russia will still hold these elections, and people kind of see them as phony elections because you don't really have another option. Again, Norway and UK are quite similar, and then Iran, theocracy led by the Ayatollah. Don't worry too much about the details of that. You only really need to know about politics in the UK, but it's useful to have a general understanding about what makes a non-democratic country. For example, freedom of the press. I know I bang on about that a lot, but that's a very important one for the media to give you the information regarding government. A country that censors the press is less democratic, like China, for instance. Right, different forms. So I'm not going to go through this too much. I think they're pretty self-explanatory. We see ourselves as a representative and liberal democracy. Now, the only really the only way you'll use direct democracy, you might get a question saying, give an example of a direct democracy, and it'll give you options. Referendum. So think Brexit for that. Direct all just means every single one of the citizens gets a say in the law, like we all did in Brexit. But that's only normally under referendums. Generally, we'll have a representative democracy where our laws are debated in the Commons, and then by the MPs, our local MPs that represent us, and then it's passed through the House of Lords and signed off with the royal assent from the monarch. So again, just make sure you understand the difference between these terms. Could come up in one marker really, but you know, things like a liberal democracy could come up as a big question. All a liberal democracy really is kind of countries like the UK, France, America trying to define themselves separately from China and Russia, who will also claim their democracies. UK and America will say, well, we're liberal democracy, which means we give the freedoms alongside the people's say, the people's voice. So just again, keep it in mind as you're separating these key terms. Right, key features of democracy. Again, this is your bread and butter of citizenship. We should all be aware of these kind of things. You know, judiciary separate from government, so it's fair, so that means everyone can be held to account. Think of these terms when you're going through this. It's accountability, checks and balances. These are all good examples of a democracy. Basically, systems in place to ensure the government can't just do what they want. Okay, because if a government can just do what it wants without the people's permission, it's undemocratic. So keep that in mind. But do have a little look at the bullet points in there. Again, they should all be part of your revision guides, but again, just keep them in mind. Regular elections. People always forget the fact that we have general elections every 5 years as an example of a democracy, an example of liberty, because if you don't like the current party, you can vote them out. Okay, so again, make sure you have a few of these under your belt come the exam, because there's always some sort of question on democracy. Remember, try and pick out 3 points at least per paragraph when you're using these 8 markers. Right, this is just a bit of an example of changes that can happen in democracy. Arguments, think of potential questions. Lowering the voting age is always like a big argument. When you're looking at these kind of questions, think, as we do in class, weigh it up, for and against. Okay, for and against. What's good about lowering the voting age? Well, there are some 16-year-olds who are generally quite interested in politics, and you know, should have a say, whereas those where you could argue that, you know, you can't even drink alcohol at 16, so why should you be able to vote? These kind of arguments you should be thinking about. Right, referendums, again, I kind of explained that before, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. Think Brexit. Right, values that underpin democracy. Sorry, I should have deleted that video on the last slide. I missed that. Again, I try to get these up quite quickly, so apologies. So when we're thinking of democracy, you can think of these 5 things. They could be points to bounce off in a paragraph demonstrating democratic values, rights, responsibilities. You know, you can bring in our human rights here, rule of law. Equality is important, the Equality Act of 2010. So keep those in mind. Not easy to see those. These should always be in your revision guides, guys, but there is a democratic checklist in there. So please just have a look through and make sure you know at least a handful of them off by heart, so you can be prepared for any 8 marker on this. There is a lot of information on the right hand side for these type of constitutions. Again, you'd normally be using this as a comparative. You're not necessarily expected to know about these other countries, but it's useful to bounce off the British Constitution and our freedoms compared to others. Okay, the aristocracy there is only one we haven't looked at. That's just ruled by the elite. Ancient Greek kind of idea. Okay. So, passage of laws. These are quite good examples just to bring in to boost up your evidence, to show how we have equality in this country. Don't see it and be like, oh my God, there's so many dates there. This isn't history. This you don't. I mean, even in history, you know, getting the date exact isn't all that. But again, if you can just refer to certain legislative or law changes that have been, then that really helps your evidence. Equality Act of 2010 is always a good one. It's one of the most important, but there are some others there for you to look at. Okay, I'll try and get through this as quick as possible because it's already 10 minutes in and we've got a lot of slides to get through. I'm going to have a look at the British Constitution here, so I'll go quickly. Primarily try and keep this video under half an hour, I guess, so it doesn't take ages to upload. Okay, so you need to know how the British Constitution is made up. So the power of the government. So they can. A big question here is where does power lie, Prime Minister or Parliament? That's a really good question, that, I think, because you've got, if a Prime Minister has a majority, then effectively he has power over Parliament, doesn't he? Because all he needs is his own party to vote along his lines. And like, remember, if a member of his party doesn't vote along his lines, that's what the whip's for. The whip is put in the party to ensure people vote with the Prime Minister. Doesn't always happen though, remember, you have rebels who don't always vote along your line, but in theory that's where power can be. Alternatively, if it's a minority, you've got to form a coalition. It means it's harder to have that power over laws in Parliament. So just have that in mind when you're thinking about where does power lie in the UK. It is a really good question. I haven't seen it come up in a while, and I think, in my opinion, you know, if you're looking at something like politics, power and government, it should always be a question, but you know, we'll see. Again, bring in when a government can bring emergency powers to impinge our freedoms. Think lockdown. You know, that impinged on our freedoms and rights, didn't it? But they did it in an emergency. They did it to protect our health. Other examples might be war. So again, just be aware of this. A lot of this may be common sense. It might be, but just when you're doing these in the exam, just really read the question and think, right, what examples have I gone through? You know, I think in citizenship there is a lot of stuff we do cover that's similar in history. You know, it's just in the present or it's an example from the past, and you can use them. Okay, again, I'll quickly run through this. So the Prime Minister and the Cabinet, PM's head. So he's head of government, not head of state. Be very careful of that, because they do like the source questions on that. So be careful. In France, for example, they often do comparisons. Just know that in the UK, the Prime Minister is the head of government, the monarch is the head of state. Okay, the PM is elected from the largest party. So the people don't actually vote for the Prime Minister; they vote for the party, and that's why we have a Prime Minister now who technically hasn't been elected by the people, because he hasn't been in a general election. Cabinet are those who help the Prime Minister rule, so it's a delegation of power. Think of the key cabinet positions that we have. So the sovereignty of Parliament, Parliament being the supreme body, it's where law passes. It's where we debate checks and balances, very important there. It's where the Prime Minister can be challenged. Again, Parliament is where laws can be repealed as well. Legislature, so again, this is basically Parliament. This is the process of laws being passed through the House of Commons and then the House of Lords, because we will look at it later on, but we've got a bicameral Parliament. 650 MPs for the Commons, just remember that, can come up as a one marker. House of Lords, they're hereditary. So the hereditary peer thing has kind of been abolished, but they are normally experts in the field. So that's a good one to think about. They're experts in the field, but they're chosen, not elected. That's important if you get a question in the House of Lords. And again, I've said bicameral Parliament. Right, opposition. So these are the second largest party. So predominantly Labour. Used to be Liberals, but now it's Liberals with the Whigs, but now it's Labour. They sit opposite House of Commons, hence the name opposition. It's a good one to be thinking about when we're doing cross-topic revision. Think EU is in a horseshoe, so you don't have a direct opposition in terms of seating arrangements, but in the House of Parliament you do, in the Commons. And basically their role is to hold them to account and basically bring up their own policies to say to the public, listen, you want to get rid of these guys, we can do this. Okay. Right. Political parties, again, I'll I'll do a video on the another video on these, but we've got a multi-party system. That's key. So really think about multi-party system. It's about choice, right? It gives you options for different political beliefs, different ideologies, and deciding where your politics can go. Good example of this is people like the Green Party on the environment. Okay, manifestos. So we should all know what this is. This is basically what each party promises to do to the public. They basically say, will you elect me on this manifesto? And it's the laws they're going to pass. Okay, so keep that in mind. Manifesto or what they're going to pass. So here's an example. I'm going to leave them on the screen. I'm not going to kind of go through them, but a generalization, I guess, of each party's political beliefs. Conservatives normally tight on the economy. They're normally known for a secure economy, which you might laugh at considering the state of the country at the moment, but historically that's what they're seen as. Labour kind of comes from fairness and the working class, historically linked to trade unions, and Liberal Democrats who've seen a little bit in between. Okay, Liberal being free, they used to be the main rival party, but just think, whoever gets elected on the basis of their manifesto, you can link this to the House of Lords as well. If a House of Lords, remember they're just meant to check laws. If they check and reject a law that's from the manifesto, the public likely won't be happy, because the public would say, well, we voted them in on the basis of that. So just think in your mind how you'd use the manifesto in a potential question. Right, the monarchy. So head of state, they provide stability, continuity, national focus. They're really important for economy as well. You think tourism. They're not generally politically involved. They're meant to stay neutral. They are meant to be informed. That needs to be updated, because the present monarch is not Queen Elizabeth II. It is Charles III. So again, apologies for that. But again, just think of the role of the monarchy. They give royal assent. They're like the final check, right? If the final stage of this process of passing a law, the monarchy technically can reject it. Okay, they never normally do, because that would be undemocratic. But just make sure you're aware of it. Okay, the citizens, what do we have the power to do? Well, we can vote, we can protest, we can demonstrate, we can go to our local MP. I'll be going through this in more detail at another point. The judiciary, just think judiciary, judges, law courts, okay? They are meant to be separate. Think about the separation of powers, basically to hold government to account. They are appointed by a selection panel, so just make sure you're aware of that. So they're not, just going back to the judiciary, they're not political appointees, and they're not elected. All right, they're appointed by a special panel. So just be aware. Okay, police decentralized. Number of regional forces. Think the Met, for example. No national police force. There's no central police that is in charge of everything. You might just always hear about the Met because London dominates everything in the news, but no. So we have Northumbrian police. There's the Manchester police, Mersey police, Merseyside, things like that. So just be aware, again, they're accountable to an elected police and crime commissioner. Okay, so police and crime commissioner elected. I think this links more to the rights and responsibilities side, but again, you can still bring it into any potential question on democracy and our constitution. They're meant to be non-political, of course. Civil service, again, okay, I need to speed up because I definitely want to keep this under half an hour. Refer to basically those who keep government. They will carry out what the cabinet want to do. They're meant to be politically neutral, anonymous, so they can't be influenced, and they always stay in their posts. So the way to look at this is when the government leaves, or when there's a general election, the government has to step down. The civil service just carries on doing what it was doing until a new government's formed and tell them to do something else. So that means it's constantly moving. Government's constantly in action. There's no stagnation in terms of getting things done. The civil service keeps the ball rolling. This is different to, let's say, America. So you might get a source question. I've seen source questions on that. Right, constitution, basically set of rules, established framework of government. Why do you have a constitution? Protect rights. I'm going to just leave these up for you so we can move through it quickly, but it's essentially, they're like a framework of how the government runs, okay? It's basically, setting up the rules to follow. Right. Separate. What is separate when one discusses the? All right. Separation of powers. We should all know this. Judiciary, executive, and legislative. Remember what they are. So again, just to repeat back on the separation of powers. So just remember the judiciary, the judges, the executive being the government, and the legislative being Parliament. Key thing there being the Prime Minister is part of two. So he'll be part, or she will be part of the executive as well as the legislative. Right, a little bit of background on England, because we all love our history. So 1215. We've got the Magna Carta. This is where King John is forced to sign it because he essentially abused his power quite a bit, and his subjects, the barons, came to ensure he signed this charter to make sure nobody's above the law. So before this, it was seen the king could essentially do what they wanted, but this meant that the king could not just go and basically technically arrest or take the baron's eldest son hostage just to raise a bit of money. That's essentially where it comes from. In terms of general progression, it is a little bit overdone, the Magna Carta. I think it is really important to limit the king's power initially, but it's very much, to help the kind of church and the lords get their, more equality, not so much the peasants or women. Okay, importantly, British Constitution is unwritten, uncodified. We should all know this. A way to use this is to say advantages of it. So flexibility allows you to change laws easier, or in theory. Just think of like the US and the gun laws. A little bit can be trickier to change when their constitution is written down and it is essentially meant to be perfect. So why would you change it? That's one of the issues in America. But Britain were quite flexible with it. No formal document with just all the laws in. So yeah, that's essentially what I just talked about. Right, our constitution is unitary, meaning we don't have states. So unitary meaning one, right? So it's more central. So this links to devolution. So when we're unitary means power derives from Westminster, our central parliament. Okay, yes, you might be thinking we've got counties and things like that, but they are not the same as like states. And a good way to link this is Germany and America, that are federal. A lot of that comes from the history. Like we are Germany and USA are very kind of new nations. You'll probably be surprised to know that Germany's far younger than America. There was a general idea of Germany, of a great Germany for a while, but it didn't essentially form until after the Franco-Prussian Wars. So they basically were established from many different kingdoms who had their own kind of nuclear central power. So that makes it harder to take power back, whereas in the UK it's different. When you get central power in Westminster, they give out power, but when you give power, technically you can take it back. Okay, so they do need a referendum to do that, but in theory they can take it back if they need it. But that is essentially our devolution. Right. Okay, yeah, monarchical constitution, kind of what I talked about at the start, rather than republic. So basically, if our monarch was gone, we'd be more of a republic. But considering we are a constitutional monarchy, it means we have more of a parliamentary constitution than a presidential one. So government comes from Parliament. They will basically form their government in the monarch's name. Right, so how's it? How are we looking? 12 slides left, 23 minutes. Right, okay. How the government is structured. So again, several different levels. This gets a bit dry, so do have a look at them. The international bodies, NATO, EU, central. Again, we're no longer part of the European Union. Remember, we've got central government. We've got our devolved national bodies, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland. We've got our regional bodies of devolution, being Greater London Authority, the police, the NHS, and we've got our unitary and county boroughs, our districts and town parishes. Okay, right. So it's divided between these tiers. Again, ultimate power remains in Westminster, unlike the American system, as we talked about previously. Again, kind of talking about what I've already said, but Parliament could technically abolish local government, take that power back if they needed to. Right, so again, please be on the ball with what the local councils can do and what national government can do. This is what we call devolved power and reserve power. So local councils collect rubbish bins, service for disabled. Sorry, I went through that a bit too quickly. Please go back and make sure you look at it. Right, so again, this is kind of going over what I've already said. So these other bodies kind of act beyond their powers, right? So they you know, you can't get Durham County Council going and declaring war. You know, they don't have that power. They can't go and make their own trade deals either. That is the reserve power held in Westminster. So again, have a look at the blue box. It's just a little caption about the move towards great devolution, less government control. Right, so local government and how it's organised. So just keep an eye on local authorities and make sure you have at least a look over these 5: county councils, district councils, unitary authorities, the London boroughs and the metropolitan districts. I mean, that would be a harsh 8 marker, really harsh and boring 8 marker, but it could potentially be one of the 1 marker or something like that, okay? So make sure you just got a general idea about each of them. Right, this is just an idea of for and against kind of, let's have a look, what was this question? Larger budgets can make more. Right, this is more about creating unitary authorities. So this is essentially meaning one authority in local government means like a county council that it covers a big area. Now, if you've got a district council as well, that means technically that would help. That would mean citizens further out might have more contact points. So this question is just looking at, well, if you've got a unitary authority, it's really good because it's got a big budget, single minds, so you can make more tactical decisions. However, the disadvantage is, you know, you might get the smaller citizen kind of being left out. Similar to the way, a good way to look at that is, guys, the unitary authorities, more local councils becoming unitary, meaning singular, rather than tiered, is the same way you can look at Westminster and the local councils. That if Westminster and our central power did everything itself, the lesser issues can often get overlooked. Okay, so think about that. Okay, a little bit on councillors and the full council. Again, they're elected to represent the people. General balance is needed. Responsible for giving services. I'll leave that on for you guys to have a look through. Full council, all elected, where they debate different policies and issues. The committees, so councils on committees monitor the council's performance. So again, it's a check and balance. In councils without a cabinet, these committees have more power as they vote and decide upon policy. Right, the cabinet again works similar like central government. Each have their own roles. Again, I'll let you have a little look over that. Just don't neglect the local authority side of it. I know it's boring, but you know, it is. You still make sure you check over it because you could get, you know, questions regarding the utility of devolution in local areas, things like that. And they do work like mini governments in terms of how they delegate powers. And the different systems they use. Just keep an eye when you're looking at it on how it's keeping a check and balance on their own power and how power is used within these local councils. Right, so leader elected mayor. This is a question I've seen come up once or twice. So essentially, the elected mayor is more of a just the head of the council, right? So most would have a mayor as a ceremonial head, is what you say, serving for 1 year. Basically, they would just rally all the discussion and then take the majority's point of view. Now it's starting to move more towards a directly elected mayor. Like Sadiq Khan's a good example of this, because a directly elected mayor might seem to have more power because they've been chosen by the public. So they've got that democratic power to then choose their own council. So they have a good way to look at this, guys, is a directly elected mayor has more power but also responsibility. Whereas a ceremonial head, that is more collective responsibility. So just, you know, keep that Spider-Man quote in your head. With great power comes great responsibility. All right. Right, accountability, this running theme throughout this. Always be thinking of these keywords, right, guys? Accountability, checks and balances, democracy, etc. So councils are held to account. They have to be. If they agree to the council working outside its powers, they can be held personally responsible. They have code of conducts to keep their councils in check. So again, they can't just do what they want. Okay, they are held to the same kind of rules as most people in the workplace. And the media, again, remember the media can access so many questions. They report on these instances, give them to the public to ensure nobody gets away with this stuff. All right, like partying during lockdown. Right, again, kind of just more examples of local government. I know best to go over this, I think, in your revision books, but it's on here to have a look at. Just there's nothing much more to say other than what's on the slide. Just make sure you have a note, make a note of it. So 2 tiers of local government, as I said before with that question, county councils and district. However, there seems to be a move more towards unitary, being 1 tier to make easy decisions. Right, again, then you've got the parishes, communities, and town councils, smaller form of local government, who can deal with like very localized things like play areas, community centres, bus shelters, etc. Right, London is quite unique as always. That's that powerful city centre. So you've got the Greater London Assembly, which is made up of 2 parts: the elected mayor and an assembly consisting of 25 members. Just make a note of how London is. So do make sure you have a look at the London slide previously. Just make sure you pause it and just have a few notes. Should be in revision guides as well. Here's a little bit on the devolved governments as well. Again, just pause it to have a look at the statement at the top there. Again, it's quite a bit of information there. Again, just be aware of how the devolved powers are a little bit different. Right, I'll leave it there because 32 minutes in, it's a much longer video than I anticipated, but like I said, I'm just trying to cram these together and get them out there before your exam. Feel free to drop me an email about anything if you need to, although I'm sure you'll probably watch this the night before. Right.